A couple minutes after 10, so we'll go ahead and get started. We'll ask Kelly to do our open invocation, and Mike Honecker, if you would lead us in the pledge.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings that you give us, Lord. We thank you for our community and our citizens here. We ask that you will continue to protect them and guide them through this time, Lord, and that you will be magnified through everything we do. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. Our first item under regular business is approve the minutes of the April 14th meeting and the April 21st budget meeting. So we have a motion. Has everybody had time to look those over, and do we have a motion to approve?
I would make that motion to approve both minutes from our April 14th regular meeting and April 21st budget meeting.
Okay, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, Cindy Alley, fiduciary supervisor, give our settlements of estates.
I have the following 4 estates up for final settlement: Gregory P. Vaughn, Peter Kent Moran, Kenny G. Milliner, and Clyde Lewis Gum. All estates are in order.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the final settlements as presented?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Your exoneration's right there. The next one.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we have exonerations, county splits, and consolidations as presented by Joe Darnell, the assessor. Do we have a motion to approve those as presented?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Okay, financials, Robin Loudermilk, Arts and Rec transfer,
There's none.
budget revisions.
We have 3 budget revisions. The first one is to increase elections postage 413-218 in amount of $3,000. That's due to the election change. The second one is to increase law enforcement overtime 700-108 by $129.92. This is from the reimbursement from City of Beckley. The third one is to increase law enforcement automobile supplies, $703.43 by $1,311.05. This was payment for property damage from West Virginia court claims.
Okay, do we have a motion to approve the budget revisions as presented?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Line item transfer.
There's none.
Okay, we have the bills in front of us that were presented to the commission. All 3 commissioners have reviewed those and signed off on them, and I'd move that we pay the bills as presented. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
New business. Consider the hiring of a new deputy sheriff, Sheriff Bruce Lake.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So I have one name to present for employment as a deputy sheriff, Andrew Barnett. He's currently employed as an assistant manager at Advanced Auto Parts in Fairleigh. He has withstood our rigorous background investigation and has completed everything, so I would recommend that we hire him as a new deputy sheriff.
Okay. Do we have a motion to approve the hiring as presented?
I would make that motion.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you, Sheriff.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Sheriff.
Okay, consider new hire to fill vacancy of a therapist at the day report, and Ms. Banton's got that for us.
Yes. Ms. Legg sent this up yesterday. They've done the interview, and they would like to hire Sandra Lovelace, and she has passed the background check, and she had 2 interviews. So.
Do we have a motion to consider the new hire?
So moved.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Consider a new family court lease. Commissioner Tincher's been working on this, so I'll turn that over to her.
In your packet, we have the lease for Hinton Department Company. Of course, the family court is currently on Court Street. It is, the rates, rental rates had increased and higher than what we would have been suitable and agreeable with the Supreme Court. So we have a new location, which is in the old Sears building, just a block down from the current location. The lease company has been very good working with us to be able to work with the design that the Supreme Court has presented to them and the requirements that the Supreme Court has. This would be $12 per square foot. The Supreme Court is reimbursing for that amount. And then, of course, the county would be responsible for utilities and security and any other expenses that would be incurred, just like we have any other buildings that we have. Happy to answer any questions if anybody has any. This is a 2,700 square foot area, and it solves some of the problems that we currently have in our family court location. Our prosecuting attorney has reviewed the lease, and everything is in order.
And you said that was Hinton Department Company that owns that?
Hinton Department Company, yes.
Which is local folks.
That is correct. A local family owns the building and has the leasing company.
And I believe $12 a foot is sort of the going rate. That's what we're paying across the street.
For the magistrates, yes, and it is significantly lower than the increased rate that we were approached with at the current location. So,
Okay.
we hope to have all the work done and do the move here in May.
Okay. Do you have a motion to approve the lease?
I would, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I would be happy to make the motion.
Okay, we have a motion to approve the lease of the building. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
What was the term of the lease?
It is a one-year lease, and it is renewable every year. We preferably would have preferred to do a longer lease, but of course, because of the commission, we're not able to go in contract more than a year. So they were agreeable to that, and it is renewable upon every year for us.
Okay. All right, thank you. Okay, just as an update on the Arts and Rec Grant Program for 2020 and 2021, we haven't set a date with the code restrictions and everything. We haven't been able to set a date for everybody to come in and give their go over their request. So we've put that on the back burner for this time. We'll bring that up hopefully within the next 2 to 3 weeks when things start opening up again. But right now, usually this room is packed, standing room only when that happens, and we cannot have that with our distancing. We probably won't be able to have that even 2 or 3 weeks from now. So we'll have to make arrangements once things are opened up to limit the amount of people that come, and each presenter to probably one person, and maybe bring them in as they present or something like that. But anyway, we haven't worked that out yet, and until the restrictions are lifted, we really can't set that date. So anyway, update on the COVID-19, and either one of you guys want to go in on this is fine. The courthouses in the county we're following the governor's the national recommendations and also the governor's recommendations. We're not allowed to open up at this time. Probably will be within the next week or two. Start opening up the courthouse again. we're taking some measures. We're ordering some, I guess they call them snooze guards, but guards to put in front of the different employees at the different stations, fiber or plexiglass, to keep somebody from getting passing germs back and forth if they sneeze or cough. Different things that we're doing to protect our employees, and we'll try to have those in place before we open up, but look forward to start doing that more and more as time goes on. So, anybody else have anything on?
Just to make the note about the $100,000 that the county received from the governor, it ultimately cannot be used for bonuses or any extra pay for employees during this time. What it can be used for is personal protective equipment for law enforcement, emergency services, health department, overtime directly related to COVID-19, which in the county we do not have that and have not had that. So the commissioners will review. We don't have any intentions of spending the money quickly. We'll look at all the options. We have until December to be able to utilize that funding. So, but we do want to make very clear that it cannot be used for bonuses as originally alluded to.
Yeah, when the governor first sent out that, or announced he was sending out that money, he gave a list of people that should go to, and by the state codes and things that we're regulated under, as Commissioner Tincher has stated, we're not allowed to do a lot of that stuff. So we are going to look at it. We've set up an account for that money and put it in an account so that it's separate from all other funds, and we can show where every dime goes to in case there's ever any question. But that has not been dispersed, and as she stated, we'll probably use it to purchase and to repay for supplies. But we'll see. We haven't decided yet. Anything else on the COVID-19?
I don't think so. We're as you've said, following the protocol as it develops. Did that 3-day qualification start yesterday to start the time clock?
Wasn't really a clarification on that.
That was my question. I read through all that, watched the governor yesterday. I read through everything that came out from the state yesterday, and it doesn't really tell us when the clock starts, with the first week, second week, third week, as much, but we're either in the first week or next week's the first week. I haven't determined that yet, but I personally will be glad when we can go back to church. We've been doing it as we're doing the meeting today, and it's all right, but I think the churches and the small businesses, and especially the small businesses in the county, need to get back to work. Our restaurants need to be able to reopen and start making more income. They can still sell carry out and things like that, but they need to be opened up where they can actually generate enough income to cover their costs, and get people back to work. So anyway, our item number 6, discuss and consider towing policy revisions. I put this on today. This towing policy has been a total recurring problem for years. We've worked on it and worked on it. Basically, the county's only interested in towing policy. We're required by the state to have one. That's the first thing. Second thing, we want to make sure that when somebody breaks down or has an accident, that there's a towing company there to take care of them. Other than those two things, that's basically the county's part of that. That's our total interest in it. So I'm going to make a motion with these 3 amendments to the towing policy, and we can discuss those and vote on them. I move that we remove the requirement for conventional records from the policy. I've spoken with several of the record companies. the ones that have them, smaller companies, they rarely use them. They've got, some of them have them, some don't. This put everybody back on the rotation, which I'll speak about in item number 3, but pretty much all of them tell me conventional records, they just don't use them anymore. They're not really necessary to function for their business. But with that, I also move that we remove the provision that does not allow towing companies to contract with other towing companies if they need assistance. If one towing company does not have a conventional record and they do get in a situation where they have to retrieve something from the water, from over a embankment or something to where they cannot get it with their equipment, we had provision in there where they could not contract with other companies. That's an arm's length transaction between two companies, two entities. I don't see where we have any reason to be in that. They should be able to contract back and forth with one another if they need to. Of course, the company that takes the call or gets the call is the one that's responsible for it, and it's up to them to contract with everybody. The third thing, and I think this is currently 911 policy, is we just have a simple rotation. We go down the list, and if a company is not available, we move on to the next person on the list. We have a fairly short list. There's only, I'm not exactly sure, something like 8, 9 companies on the list anyway for small towing. And if a company's not available, we just move on to the next person on the list. Make it easier on our 911 dispatchers. We don't back up. You're down the list. And then the second part of that is if a towing company is called out by the 911 center and dispatched to a scene, and another company, as we say, jumps the call and goes to the scene, and the company that was originally called out, if they do not get the tow, then they stay at the top of the list and they get the next call out. The company that jumped the call or happened to be coming by and was given the tow by someone on the scene loses their next rotation, and then they go right back into the list after that. But we don't want to penalize the guy that's been called out and take his rotation position away from him if somebody else has taken his call. So those are my recommendations in my motion, and I'll open it up for discussion.
Well, could we discuss those and vote on them separately?
I don't have a problem with that.
Okay. I think that would, hopefully that would be easier.
Okay. We'll take the first one, that we remove the requirement that for conventional records from the policy. I'll make the motion that we accept that. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Let's have a little discussion, please.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I was a
ask
little
for it.
slow on the pickup. Would you care to go?
It doesn't matter to me. No, you're
Okay.
fine. You go right ahead.
A little background, as Commissioner Rose has already said, we have a towing policy because we're required to have one. I hope that we can all agree that it would be preferable for government to stay out of the business of private business. I don't think we have a problem among the three of us on that point. The situation, quite simply, is that if you have, well, let me see if I can just read it. The code, West Virginia code, not our policy. West Virginia Code, Chapter 24-6-12, requires that county commission in each county of the state of West Virginia or a municipality operate an emergency telephone system or an enhanced emergency telephone system like the 911 shall establish a policy that provides for the most prompt, fair, equitable, and effective response to requests for emergency towing. We have the phone system, we got to have a towing policy. So that's where we began. In our aim to be fair and equitable as required, we establish a rotation. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But other than that, the subject right now is that the policy, not the code, but the policy that we have requires that the tow operators have a conventional wrecker. I was opposed to that provision in the beginning, still am, but it seemed to me that that was just a deeper, one more step intruding into the business of private business. I didn't like it. And I thought it was an unnecessary additional requirement, and I think it's pretty easy to see that for the most part it was unnecessary because even the folks that did have a conventional light duty, in particular, wrecker, rarely used them. The tool of choice is always a rollback. So they got along for the most part without these conventional wreckers, yet it was in the policy. Now, in the middle of the winter, we'd had a policy for quite some time, but in the middle of the winter we decided that finally the time had come that we would enforce the policy. The enforcement of the policy required tow operators to make a business decision. And that decision is whether or not they were going to have a conventional wrecker. Well, 2 of them already had one. 2 of them purchased one. And the others chose not to make that investment and therefore were no longer on the rotation. Now, our policy says that we can change our policy. Pretty convenient, but probably necessary. Last November, we voted in 11 addendums to that policy. We were changing those. Those were 11 things that we were changing before we started strict enforcement. Now, the requirement for a conventional wrecker was not one of those. At that time, I had hoped that it would be, but my wishes did not prevail. I supported the idea of doing away with that requirement then, but I can't now because we have required people to act by putting that in the policy and enforcing it. Now, remember that the code said that the aim of the code, not the policy, mentioned words of prompt, fair, and equitable. Well, I don't think it changes anything if you have a conventional wrecker or not. As far as prompt, fair, pretty abstract concept, but it is certainly not equitable to require somebody to do something, to be a member of your organization, And those people that invest thousands of dollars doing that, and others that do not, and now you're going to change the rules again. It just seems like to me that although I did not want that requirement there in the first place, it seems that it is unfair and unequitable to take it away at this time. Amen.
I would, to make note of that, and aside from that, I would like to just note that every towing company, and I have to step back from this because all of this went on long before I ever came along as a county commissioner, and this issue has been something that we have continually dealt with since I have been here. But speaking specifically to this one item, and this is where, Mike, I may bring you in, but Mike Honaker, our Emergency Service Homeland Security Director, works specifically with the towing companies and this policy. The issue that you brought up of that this was not on the original proposal when we did the addendums, and that companies were made to make a decision to follow the rules. Yes, you can say that, but all companies were also advised that this issue would also be reviewed again in May, and that it was up to them to make a business decision as to what they wish to do and not do, and that is solely on the business. But they were all advised that this policy would be reviewed again in May, and this particular item may be something that would be addressed at that time.
Well, this item was not one of those addendums.
No, but as we were to be discussing this in May, the entire policy, not just review of the addendums again.
Well, okay.
And with
But
that being said, if there was an issue, it could have easily been brought up at our previous meeting when we did review all of those addendums to be addressed, and it wasn't.
You're talking about in November?
I'm talking about when we discussed with all of the addendums that we reviewed, and then we gave a
That was in November.
six-month period, which was to be in May, and that it would the entire policy would be reviewed again.
Well, whether or not that, I think particularly we talked about the addendums and we're going to revisit them. But to revisit the whole policy, that's fine, but we're not talking about changing the ETA as it's written. We're not talking about saying you can't vet calls, and we're not talking about a separation of service calls and towing calls. We're talking about a major investment that was required. And it's as if we required these people to make a decision, we required these people to adapt to our policy, and then we have observed how they adapted to it as private businesses and say we don't like it.
One thing I didn't do before, just for bookkeeping, I didn't withdraw my first motion. I withdrew my first motion. Second motion was the one to remove the requirement for conventional record. So that is the current motion that's on the table. The reason for part of the reason for my second, which will now be my second motion, to remove the restrictions as far as being allowed to contract back and forth, is those folks with the conventionals, to allow the people that do not have the conventional records and have the rollbacks, if needed, they can contract with those guys to come out. If I had a conventional record and my business at this time, I wouldn't do away with it, simply because even if you don't use it too much, if you need it at certain points, or if other contractors, other towing companies need it, they could. They would need to contract you with your services at that conventional. But anyway, going back to my first motion, if there's no other comment, I'll call for the vote.
This is the removal of the conventional record requirement.
The removal of the conventional record requirement from our policy.
Okay.
Well, but I think there needs to be a clarification, because you just said that if the removal of the requirement that in order for them to be on the rotation, because right, correct, because your argument is that if no one required anybody to purchase a piece of equipment.
Only if they wanted to play our game.
Well, and that's up to the business. That's the business
It is.
decision. And so, but with that being said, the whole issue is the point of them being on the rotation. They can still have just like Commissioner Rose said, if they have their conventional record, they could still use that for every call if they so wish, to make sure their business investment is utilized. So with that being said, I think there needs to be a clarification of the purpose for them to be on the rotation for that. And that may be not in anything of importance, but I think that does need to be a clarification.
That wording seems to be a
Anyway, I would
distinction
be
without
glad to
difference.
include that clarification that they, as I said, this puts everybody back on the rotation, but they can still have a conventional. They can use whichever piece of equipment they want. They can respond with whatever they want. If it's a small single-axle dump truck or cattle truck or something of that nature, a rollback doesn't work for that. But they can use the conventional ton and a half, 2-ton wrecker for that. So, okay, all those in favor of the motion with the clarification signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed?
Nay.
Okay, number 2, remove the provision from our current towing policy that so that we will allow towing companies, to contract with other towing companies for assistance as needed, because that is, well, as I say, that removes us from interfering between two businesses, conducting business between them. It does not affect us in any way, and they can contract between themselves if necessary. But the original person called out and takes the call is the responsible party for that tow. So do we have any discussion on that one? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Unanimous. Part number 3, the current towing policy is, and I think this, like I said, is currently what the 911 dispatch policy is, but just put it in writing. It's a simple rotation. You go down the list, and if a company is not available, we move to the next person on the list and don't back up. That way our dispatchers don't have to keep track of, backing up 2 or 3 or 4 spaces. They just go down the list. And if a towing company is called out by the 911 center, if the company is not available, then they just move on down the list. If the towing company is called out by the 911 center and another company jumps the call, the company that was called out remains at the top of the list and gets the next call out, and the company that jumps the call will lose forfeit one rotation, their next rotation, because they took that call. They do not get the next rotation call, but they just continue on down the line. you would just simply skip that company and go to the next company down the list. So that this way, the 911, it simplifies things, I think, for the 911 center for our dispatchers, and they don't have to keep track of backing up and everything. So that's my motion number 3. Do we have any discussion?
Question for Mike. How does that, or how do we know, or how do our dispatchers know if a call is junked? And is there follow-up from the scene of the accident on when it's final of who leaves the scene with the vehicle in tow?
Yeah, all that information would be entered into the system and put on a call sheet.
Okay.
So that is brought to my attention either by the dispatcher actually telling me it occurred, or sometimes even before the dispatcher would tell me, another wrecker service would complain that they were called, were on their way, and whoever on whatever scene allowed somebody that had not been called to hook up and take the call.
Right.
So the couple of times that's occurred since we met on November 12th, we have taken the next turn from the call jumping wrecker service. So I continue to have dialogue with all of these wrecker firms and tell them what we're trying to do. And, you know, our policy, I feel like, got us over the target, but the greatest challenge has always been we have so many people involved, so many different entities involved in this, that it's tough to enforce. And as far as the conventional wrecker thing, I know that's already done. That was in the policy long before we started dealing with this, and all the firms, almost all the wrecker firms were out of compliance with it. And so I had many conversations over the last year and a half with wrecker firm after wrecker firm. There's never been a week that I've not had some contact with wrecker firms or dealt with complaints. This one, the particular rotation thing, what was challenging with that is we unless you change it today, we were counting a owner's request as a rotation, and it convolutes the whole attempt to maintain a rotation. That's a challenge. But even aside from that, and we constantly have calls from record services, want to know where they are, and want to know how many calls. If they get a lot of owners' requests, they want to know how many ahead they are. They're trying to figure that out and make plans and be available. So as long as we have scanners and so many people involved, it's going to be challenging. But it is tough on the dispatchers. They feel the weight of, I got to make sure I count how many calls, and I got to do the log sheet right, and that type of thing. But we do what we're told.
Since we haven't voted yet, I can amend my motion, but should we add owner's request in there, that does not take away a towing company's call, so that we do not put additional burden on our dispatchers where the list works with the rotation works with the 911 calls for a record. It does not include owner's request. That way, because that's in state code, somebody can own a request at any time. And if their owner request, it's because somebody wants that particular person, or that particular company has a good reputation, or whatever, for whatever reason. And that should not count against their rotation, in my opinion. So should I add that to my motion so that that's clear in the statement?
I know the intent of the addendum on November 12th when that was addressed was the ultimate goal was to more fairly distribute wrecker calls to the wrecker firms that are on the rotation. but what we often see are the unintended consequences. And so I get a lot of complaints about that we're penalizing a record firm, and it's several of them. Of course, a lot of them came off the list when they didn't have the conventional. And so then when we went to this particular addendum, there's no way to sugarcoat it. They feel like it's socialism. We as the government are attempting to make sure each business gets their share of business. And I'm not sure we should be doing that. I'm not sure that we even have the authority or the standing to do that. I mean, the code section is very clear. The commission can enact any policy you want. And I've always said from the beginning, it can be 30 pages long or it could be on one page, depending on what you decide. But I think through this process, we've seen quite a few unintended consequences of trying to over-regulate. And you know, we are asked, you know, constantly, why is this person not in compliance with 150 CSR 9? Why is this record not in compliance with Public Service Commission rule number whatever? And we didn't adopt 150 CSR 9. We didn't adopt the Public Service Commission. We would have to have a staff record expert. We would have to have an employee whose only job was to enforce record policy if we were to go that far. And so I think the motions today are a sincere effort to try and pull us back a little bit and let capitalism or free markets, you know, do what they do. But to some degree, we still have to make sure that it's not the Wild West out there. And so if we address the call jumping, the scanner jumping of calls and things like that, which we've done, I think we can do that. But I know this conventional record thing, I've been here a year and a half, I've never seen a conventional record towing anything other than heavy duty. So, but as far as the rotation, that addendum was addressed on the 12th. There was a pretty hearty discussion about it as to whether or not this was something we should do or shouldn't do. And you asked me to come back 6 months later and specifically address any concerns you had. And I think that's it's unfair to business, and I'm not sure we have the authority to even do that.
So I'm going to amend my motion to include that owner's request do not count against rotation calls.
I'm sorry, to include what?
I am amending my motion to include that owner's requests do not interfere with rotation calls, because that's a separate, basically a separate request by an individual. And so we can keep our simple rotation. Owner's request just comes in and goes right back out on the air, or the call goes out to the company requested to make that call. And if they turn it down, then if they're busy, they're tied up, broke down, whatever, then that call would go to the next on rotation, because that person wasn't able to fulfill it. But as long as they can fulfill their request, owner's request, that's theirs. It's not counted against them. So that's the motion now with the amendment.
Well, we've got two issues in this motion now, it seems to me. Let's address the first one. Mike, is it against the policy, our policy, to jump a call?
Yes.
So if someone does that, they violated the policy.
Yes.
And as I understand it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, what we're proposing is that the punishment for jumping that call will be to miss the next call. Is that correct?
Yes.
Well, that's no punishment at all.
It is.
You got a call, so you missed the next one. All you did was change the order of things. The number of calls you got stays the same, and you have violated the policy, and you didn't lose a number of calls that you had that week or that month. And you can die believing that nobody jumps that call when they realize it's an uninsured junker down over the hill somewhere that they're never going to get anything out of. So to say that you're going to punish someone who jumps a call, someone who got a call that wasn't theirs, you're going to punish them by taking away the next call, numerically is no punishment.
They're not gaining, well, I'm not going to get into a big argument. They're not gaining a call. They're getting their number of calls, but they're not gaining a call because they're losing their next call in rotation. But
And they're not losing.
As I said when I first started this item on the agenda, as the county commission and as Greenberg County and as the 911 center, our mission is that if somebody breaks down or is in an accident, that there is a towing company goes and takes care of that person or that call, whether it's a resident of the county or it's someone passing through the county. For us to get into the weeds to the point where we would have to pass an ordinance and try to take people to court, I think is ridiculous. I think it's just over the top and beyond any reasonable scope that the county commission wants to get into or wants to put our 911 and emergency service people into. Our sheriff's department doesn't need the additional, they've got plenty to do without the additional work of going out and investigating such things. And I just think that we need to simplify this whole matter rather than make it more complicated and try to enforce things that really at this point are unenforceable. And I can't imagine that the county needs to get any deeper into the woods on this. If one towing company feels that another has aggrieved them, there's a process for that, and it's not the county commission, it's the court system. And so I don't think we need to get drawn into that. So I'll call for the question. All those in favor of item...
Can we address the
No,
second part of this?
The second, it was one motion with an amendment, so I'm calling for the question. All those in favor of the motion with the amendment to not penalize for the owner's request included, signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay, and I can hear people saying Commissioner McClung voted against penalizing a call jumper.
No, but you're wanting to make an extremely complicated process out of something that does not necessarily need to be so. Mike Honecker, since you've got to make the corrections or additions to our policy, when would we make an effective date for this? First of the month? Middle of next month?
I can make these changes in the policy and send it to you today, and then it would be whatever date the commission decides to make it effective.
Okay, do we want to make it the first of the month to go into effect?
I think that's perfectly fine. I mean, whatever the preference, or if we need to, however we need to notify our towing companies and make sure everyone is aware of that again.
As I said,
I would leave that up to Mike as far as what your preference is.
We can do it by the first of the month.
Okay, let's make it first of the month. That May 1st, it'll go into effect, and you can notify the towing companies.
Right.
And then when you bring it down, I'll take care of signing. Okay. So we have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 We're adjourned. Thank you, guys.